Karoline Leavitt had to run away. Yes, the woman whose job it is to respond to questions literally couldn't do it. And honestly, if we're being more precise about what Karoline Leavitt actually does, it's to propagandize on behalf of Donald Trump. Yet even that task proved too much for her. She has always been spectacularly terrible at her job, but lately, the tone she takes while failing has become even more angry and combative. Today was a prime example, as she was pressed on a Vanity Fair article exposing the chaos inside the White House, as well as highlighting just how bad her Botox and filler treatments have gotten. Karoline Leavitt completely ran from the press. It was a total meltdown, and we're going to dive into it. But before we do, if you could quickly hit like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, press that subscribe button because it really helps support our work. And before we get to the exact moment Karoline Leavitt ran away, we need to start with where she tried and failed to answer questions about the economy.
Trump is focused on putting Americans back to work. And if you look at the job gains historically throughout this past year, what's most remarkable about the labor market right now is that President Trump is putting American citizens back into the labor force. And we know under the previous administration and Joe Biden that 100% of the jobs gained were for foreign-born workers. These were for people who flooded our country and took the jobs of hardworking Americans. And so President Trump's policies of not just border security, but also incentivizing investment into our country. He's gone overseas to recruit trillions of dollars in new investments, new jobs, economic growth into our manufacturing industry here at home. We're going to continue to see all of that come to fruition, which means more jobs for hardworking Americans and also an increase in their wages. If you look at the wage growth that has taken place over the past year as well, on average, the American worker is earning about $1,200 more over a year thanks to President Trump's policies. Under Joe Biden, they were losing on average $3,000 per year. And so this president is focused on pro-growth policies for American workers, not foreign workers, for putting people back to work, particularly in our manufacturing industry, which has always been the backbone of our nation's economy.
You know how conservatives are always talking about safe spaces, how liberals need to be coddled, and how everyone should be sensitive to feelings. Isn't it ironic that whenever the jobs numbers come out, like last month, when we lost 40,000 jobs, Karoline Leavitt runs straight to Fox, where she can spew her nonsense about how President Trump is supposedly only creating jobs for American citizens. Meanwhile, jobs are being lost, so by her logic, he's only losing jobs from American citizens. And the idea that Joe Biden was supposedly only handing work to undocumented immigrants is just completely absurd. How would you even track that? Not a single native-born American citizen missed a job opportunity in those 4 years under Biden. It's ridiculous, nonsensical, and totally false. Yet that's the narrative they push, a distraction from the chaos happening inside the White House. Fox lets Karoline Leavitt spout these lies unchecked, but things escalated when she was later questioned by the outside press pool, which we'll get into. First, though, let's examine this disastrously bad answer.
I want to ask you, Karoline, about the two-part series of articles in Vanity Fair on Susie Wiles, the Chief of Staff, and the President's inner circle. I mean, clearly there was a lot of cooperation between the White House and Vanity Fair on this because there's numerous interviews that Susie Wiles had with the writer over the course of pretty much a year. Portraits were taken of his inner circle, including her, J.D. Vance, Stephen Miller. I mean, it looks like the White House was working hand in glove with Vanity Fair, and yet here's Susie Wiles' reaction to the series of articles. Quote, "The article published early this morning is a disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. Significant context was disregarded, and much of what I and others said about the team and the president was left out of the story. I assume after reading it that this was done to paint an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative about the president and our team." She goes on after that. You can read the full thing on X, but what happened? What went wrong?
Well, look, I would just echo my boss, Susie Wiles, who is the best chief of staff in our nation's history, working for the greatest president in our nation's history, and that this was, unfortunately, another attempt at fake news by a reporter who was acting disingenuously and really did take the chief's words out of context. But I think most importantly, the bias of omission was ever present throughout this story. The reporter omitted all of the positive things that Susie and our team said about the president and the inner workings of the White House. And as Susie said today, it's deeply unfortunate that happened, but it won't distract us from making America great again. And President Trump has been such a productive president and has accomplished more in 11 months than most presidents do in 8 years because of his vision and his tenacity, which is executed on and facilitated by our great White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, whom I'm very proud of to call a boss and a mentor and a friend.
Yeah, his inner circle, the president's inner circle, family coming to her defense. Don Jr. just posting Susie Wiles, by far the most effective and trustworthy chief of staff that my father has ever had.
So that was basically a non-answer. And what's also telling is that Susie Wiles decided this morning to go on a posting spree, much like her boss, claiming the article was a hit piece and that the interviewer did a terrible job. But this wasn't one isolated conversation. Susie Wiles sat for interview after interview, again and again, discussing a wide range of topics about the dysfunction and chaos inside this White House. So if there's an issue with what was written, then the issue clearly lies within the White House itself. That's exactly what's being exposed right now. Susie Wiles openly talked about how difficult it's going to be for J.D. Vance when he runs for president, the internal disorder within the administration, and Donald Trump being named in the Epstein list and the Epstein files. And because of all of that, when Karoline Leavitt was questioned again, she had nowhere left to hide, and she chose to run.
As for the Vanity Fair article, Michael, I'll take your question directly. This is, unfortunately, another example of disingenuous reporting, where you have a reporter who took the Chief of Staff's words wildly out of context, did not include the context those conversations were had within. And then further, I think the most egregious part of this article was the bias of omission that was clearly present. And we see a lot of this when dealing with the media every day. You will leave out important context, leave out comments and facts. You know, many people in this building spoke with that reporter, and those comments were never included in the story, probably because it didn't push this false narrative of chaos and confusion that the reporter was clearly trying to push. So what I'll say about our Chief of Staff, as you've seen from not just myself, but also the entire cabinet, and a groundswell of support from people on Capitol Hill who don't even work in this building, about how incredible Susie Wiles has been to President Trump, and he's been able to accomplish so much because of his leadership and his tenacity, but also because of Chief of Staff Wiles' leadership and her ability to effectuate his agenda. So
She literally answers questions for a living. That is her job, and yet she couldn't do it. And I want to come back to something Karoline Leavitt constantly says, something that I know really gets under everyone's skin, especially considering the nonstop lying that comes out of this administration. She and Donald Trump love to claim that they oversee what they call the most transparent administration in history. And the reason they say that is because of a very specific distinction they make. They argue that they've answered more questions, spoken to the press more, and appeared in public more than Joe Biden ever did, more than Barack Obama ever did. Now, if that's supposed to be true about Barack Obama, I seriously doubt it, especially when Donald Trump now works, and I'm being generous here, from about 2 to 5 in the afternoon. It's been well documented how few events he's even willing or able to do because of his visibly deteriorating health. But again, they make this claim because they don't actually answer questions. Let me correct myself. They respond to questions. Karoline Leavitt will tell you they answer a lot of questions, and that's what makes them so transparent. But responding is not the same thing as answering. We can get into the semantics of it, but it matters. If you ask Donald Trump, "Are you in the Epstein files?" and he responds with, "It's a hoax," Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Benghazi. Is that an answer? Or is it just noise? Donald Trump responds constantly. Karoline Leavitt responds constantly. And those responses are usually some version of the media is fake. Everyone is out to get Donald Trump. He ran 6 marathons this morning. He bench pressed an 18-wheeler. He's a genius. And he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. But what does any of that actually tell us about the state of our country, about the economy, about Donald Trump's declining health, about the Epstein files and their release? I could go on forever. It tells us nothing. They tell us nothing. And that's the entire point. They want distraction. They want a shiny object. But right now, the real shiny object is the collapse happening inside Donald Trump's own administration. The fact that his own chief of staff would go on the record and admit that he is in the Epstein files is insane. The fact that she would throw Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Karoline Leavitt, and Stephen Miller all under the bus is insane. But that is the current state of Donald Trump's White House. Pure insanity. And it's only getting worse as the Epstein scandal continues to build. And Susie Wiles seems perfectly comfortable adding a little extra fuel to that fire. She's not just tossing in a log, she's basically dumping gasoline all over it. The legal deadline for the release of the Epstein files is Friday. That deadline exists because of a law Donald Trump himself signed. So by law, it has to come out. And even if it doesn't, even if Pam Bandy tries to block it, more information keeps surfacing. More information that Pam Bandy can't stop. And Ari Melber broke all of that down on MSNBC right here.
Do you have pictures of people engaged in sexual acts as part of this?
As part of this release, yes, there are pictures of people engaged in sexual acts.
Molly, again, there has to be a serious fairness about how that information is used, and other laws are implicated. Having said that, there are a lot of open questions about whether Mr. Epstein kept extra records, videos, and otherwise for the purpose of blackmail, which then raises questions about whether government officials in either party were blackmailed or responding to other powerful people who were blackmailed. And if so, there could be extra crimes to review. Your view of what I think is a rather extraordinary statement by that member of Congress, either it's true, see above the blackmail issue, if it's not, that we would eventually learn that, and that would be quite a false claim. So it's a big deal. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there were video cameras in a lot of these rooms. We know the FBI had hundreds of hours of videos and tapes. I mean, this makes a lot of sense. And we've heard Congressman Garcia say something to the same effect, right? That there's blackmail material, that they're all pretty traumatized by whatever it is they've seen, and they're very worried about redacting the faces of the victims in order to not create more damage for these women who have been through hell. So I do think it's fair to say that there's certainly some terrible stuff. It has to be released in a way that is so careful for these women who have been through so much, and where it does not make, it does not re-traumatize them or make them, some of these women are scared for their lives and or make them, give them more public scrutiny, because that is not what anyone wants. And so I think they're really trying to walk a line here. But the reason why oversight is doing a good job here is that they are keeping the pressure on the DOJ to release this information and to show that they can run a check on it to some extent. Because otherwise, we just don't have a lot of faith in the Trump DOJ for obvious reasons.
There is absolute chaos inside this White House, and there is nothing Donald Trump can do to contain it. The leaks are not stopping. They're only going to keep coming as people scramble to save their own careers. Donald Trump is focused on exactly one thing: keeping his name out of the Epstein files. Pam Bandy is focused on keeping her job and maybe pushing Kash Patel out. Kash Patel may be trying to get Dan Bongino sidelined, or maybe it's the other way around, and Dan Bongino wants Kash Patel gone. At this point, it's hard to even keep track because so many power struggles are happening at once. There is too much infighting, too much panic, too many competing interests for Donald Trump to ever get control of this again. He can't put the lid back on this, and every single day it keeps getting worse. And we are going to keep covering all of it on this show. If you want to support that, as always, hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you made it to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I will see you soon.